Hello and welcome to Aero Innovations. I'm Aero and I'll be your host this evening. If you're new to the channel, I'm a longtime pro who specializes in the low stakes. So if you're looking to crush low stakes, no limit hold'em, then you've come to the right place. In this episode, we're going to jump right to my most recent session. We'll be playing 2-5 no limit hold'em at the Wynn Encore in Las Vegas, where I bind for 1,500, which is 300 big blinds. It's Friday night on November the 22nd. Although technically Saturday morning, since we don't start until 4:06 in the morning. 4 minutes into the session, there's a live 10. The button limps. I look down at ace-10 of diamonds in the small blind, which is a well above average hand, but my position is absolutely terrible. We're definitely going to raise the action up, but the only question is, for how much? Usually in a limp pot without too much money in the middle, I prefer to use a smaller sizing so I don't feel pressure to try to steal the pot post-flop if I don't hit anything. So I bumped the price of poker up to $40. The big blind calls, the straddle folds, and the button comes along for the ride as well. The flop comes deuce, 7-5, rainbow, with 1 diamond. We don't flop anything at all except for a backdoor flush draw, but we do have a couple of random overcards. Normally, I don't bother c-betting on small flops, where I have extremely low equity, but I don't do anything 100% of the time to add a bit of randomization to my play. I think very occasionally randomizing your play is very important to keeping your hands disguised, your playstyle dynamic, and your range more difficult to guess. So since this flop is decently disconnected, just like most flops containing a 7 and a deuce, there's a good chance my opponents might have missed the flop completely as well, or at least telegraphed the strength of their hand if I bet really small. So I start with a stagnant c-bet of another $40. Unfortunately, the big blind doesn't like the idea of my tiny bet, as he puts in a raise to 90, which is barely a min raise. The button folds. It's only $50 for me to call, and I'm already in for 40. If my opponent only has 1 pair, it's definitely worth it for me to call here, since I could hit a 10, and I could also hit an ace to improve. Plus, I could also use any number of various high cards to try to bluff at the pot on future streets as well. If my opponent had raised to any considerable amount, this would just be an easy fold. But due to his bet sizing, I'm priced in, so I make the call. The turn brings in some hope in the form of a 9 of diamonds. We improve to the nut flush draw to go along with our 2 random overcards, but 6-8 does make a straight. I'm not going to come out firing here though, because if our opponent has more than 1 pair, we're just going to make our draw significantly more expensive for ourselves in the event that our opponent raises any bet that we make. And our equity has just improved pretty dramatically, so we don't want to lose out on that. So I make the rational choice and just check. Not one to slow down, my opponent fires a second bullet for 175 this time, into the pot of 310. This is a very strong bet. Now you may think this is a very small price point considering the flush draw, but keep in mind the flush draw came on the turn. Most hands wouldn't randomly pick up a flush draw here. I think my opponent may have a hand strong enough to go for all of the beans by the river. Either that or he's trying to portray as if he does. We are definitely not going anywhere now that we've picked up the nut flush draw on an unpaired board, but I still take my time before acting. I don't want to give out any timing tells. I also hem and haw and ask my opponent why he's betting so much. Is his hand really that strong? This won't matter if the river breaks out, but I like to prime my opponents in the event that we do hit. See, a lot of recreational players will take very little time when they have a big draw. They will call with their draws almost instantly. This will very often give me an indication as to what sorts of hands they're holding. It's also known as a timing tell. Think about it. If you had a really big hand, on a wet board the flop 2 to a suit for instance, let's say you flopped a set, you would have to take a moment to decide if you want to raise, and for how much, right? You would also have to take into consideration how many players are in the hand, evaluate how big the pot is, and whether you want to slow play your hand or not. You would never just snap call with such a hand, that's for darn sure. So when recreational players snap call on super wet boards, pros can often tell they're usually on a draw of some sort. We do not want to give out that sort of information, so I take my time before making the call. Unfortunately, the river completely breaks out with an 8 of hearts. So now any 6 makes us straight, but that doesn't really matter when we're sitting here with ace high. So after I check, and our opponent fires yet again for another bullet for 400, I have no choice but to fold. I did not in fact win this one, but hopefully you guys enjoyed watching Rain Delay being all handsome and stuff across the table from me with his intimidating 6K stack. We don't play another notable hand until a full hour passes. Here, Under the Gun opens for 10, which is a really non-standard open size. The button tanks for a moment before putting in the call. This pause will come into play later. The small blind calls, and I call for 5 more with 4-6 of spades in the big blind. The flop comes King, 2, 10, with a club and 2 spades. We flop a 6-high flush draw on a board that should be pretty good for the original raiser. So when the small blind checks, of course I check as well. Under the Gun continues with a c-bet of 25 into the $40 pot. The button and small blind call, and of course this gives us a magnificent price to call as well with our flush draw. The turn brings in a 4 of hearts. We improve to a pair to go along with our flush draw. We now have between 13 to 14 outs against most single pair holdings. Small blind checks, and I check as well with devious intentions depending upon how the players react behind. This time, when Under the Gun gives up and checks, it's the button who bets, and for a pretty hefty bet of 100 into the pot of 140, with a stack of just over 600. He bought in short for about 500 bucks. When the small blind folds, I get to planning. Okay, so my opponent considered raising pre-flop, which means he has a pretty good hand. But when the Under the Gun player put in a continuation bet, he only just smooth called, even on this super draw heavy board with multiple players in the hand. That leads me to believe he has a 1-pair type of holding at best, with maybe a hand like King Jack or King Queen suited or some such. Since the original raiser checked, he knows he most likely has the best hand right now and wants to charge the maximum for the draws. This 4 surely couldn't have helped him. With my position on the flop, seeing a bet, and 2 other callers, I could have anything here, especially with the pre-flop action of only having to call another $5. I could have like King 4, Deuce 4, or maybe even a suited 10-4. Sure, I could just call this $100 bet, but then my hand would be pretty face up, and I like to play my high equity draws hyper aggressive to potentially take down pots without needing to improve. We know that our opponent bought in short, which means he's most likely a recreational player who doesn't want to put too much money into pots. And we also know that he most likely only has a 1-pair type of holding at best. So with these thoughts in mind, I put in a toe-curling check raise to 400. Under the Gun quickly gets out of the way, and the button starts to tank. He can't really just smooth call here because he'll barely have 200 left behind. This is pretty much a call for his entire stack, and he has only 135 bucks invested so far. We actually would much prefer a fold here. We are attempting to use fold equity to get the fold after all. However, after nearly a minute and a half in the tank, our opponent decides to go all in. It's $209 more for me to call. This is not ideal. However, with the pot odds, we have no choice but to make the call, hoping to improve. Unfortunately, this does not happen when the river brings in a King of Hearts, pairing the top card. Our opponent tables King Queen of Spades for trip kings. Even with such a strong hand, he still tanked for a minute and a half. I think if our opponent didn't also have the spade draw, he would have folded almost instantly, and we would have gotten away with our sinister plan. I'm surprised he only just smooth called with such a strong hand on the button. Even though we didn't win this hand, I still really liked my assessment of the situation. A few minutes later, Under the Gun limps, and everyone else folds to me in the small blind, where I look down at 8-10 of diamonds. If there were more players in the hand, I would just call here, but with just the blinds and the 1 limper, I decide to take the initiative with a small pot building raise to 15. The big blind folds, but the Under the Gun limper makes the call. We go heads up, out of position, to flop of deuce 3-8 with 2 spades and a heart. We somehow manage to flop top pair. Since our hand is very unlikely to improve, I like to try to take down the pot right here and now. I start with a stronger than normal c-bet of 25 into the $35 pot. Our opponent makes the call. The turn brings in a 4 of diamonds. Ace-5 makes a straight, and so does 5-6. There are still a lot of hands we're currently ahead of though that will still call a pretty hefty bet. Hands like pocket 5s or 6s, a flush draw, a pair with a straight draw combination like Ace-3 or Ace-4, and a few different weaker combinations of an 8, like 7-8 or 8-9. Of course, we can also obviously be beat here, but I think there are a lot more combinations of hands that we currently beat compared to hands that we lose to, so I keep my foot on the gas with another pot size bet of 70. If we get raised here, it'll just be an easy fold. But instead, our opponent makes the call for a second time. The river brings in a jack of clubs. This shouldn't change anything unless our opponent very specifically had a flush draw containing a jack. If we had air here, I would use this river card as a potential scare card to throw out an absolutely massive river bluff for like 300 or so. But we do not in fact have air. We have pretty decent showdown value. And there's also no need to try to go for super thin value on this sort of board, because we may not even have the best hand. So I just check, and our opponent checks as well. I table our hand, but it's no good. Our opponent flips over Queen 8 of hearts for an 8 with a bigger kicker. Wah, wah, wah. A bigger kicker, and another kick in the tennis balls for Aero. Freaking A, man. I can't win a hand tonight. At this point, we're already down over $1,000, and we're only barely an hour into the session. 30 minutes later, I open to 25 in the cutoff with my least favorite premium starting hand. Oh yes, we're talking about the accursed pocket kings. The button calls. The small blind folds, but the big blind calls as well. The flop comes queen, jack, deuce, rainbow. This is one of those rare instances where we don't immediately see an ace on the flop. Big blind checks. Alright, time to find out if we're going to win a small pot or lose a big one. The queen and the jack are pretty connected, so there are many different straight draw combinations out there. Since this is a multi-way pot, I start with a 2/3 pot size bet of 50 into the $75 pot. The button folds, but the big blind makes the call. The turn brings in a deuce of diamonds, putting 2 diamonds on board, meanwhile pairing bottom pair. This is a very desirable card. It greatly decreases the odds our opponent could have been slow playing the flop with a set of deuces, and it also makes a pair of jacks or queens most likely reduced to only 2 outs. Plus we now counterfeit a slow played hand like jack-queen. Our opponent checks again. I really want to keep in a jack or a queen, but we also need to keep the straight draws in mind, draws that might have improved with a backdoor flush draw as well. So I throw out a second bullet for an even $100. It's a modest bet that's not too big and not too small. Unfortunately, it's just a tiny bit more than our opponent is willing to pay as he puts in the fold. Good gosh, I just won one with pocket kings. What is the world coming to? Maybe I can keep this momentum and start to break even? 2 hands later, under the gun opens for 20. I call in the low jack with 4-6 of diamonds. It's a suited 1-gapper, but I have position to the original raiser, so I think it's a reasonable call. The hijack and big blind end up calling as well, so we go 4 ways to a flop of 6, ace, 4 with 2 hearts and a diamond. We flop bottom 2 pairs and a backdoor flush draw. Big blind checks. The under the gun original raiser throws out a strong c-bet of 50 into the $80 pot. We currently have 2 pairs, but our hand is pretty vulnerable. 5-7 and 3-5 both have open-ended draws. We can easily be counterfeited with this sort of hand. Plus there's the obvious flush draw as well. While I'm sitting here contemplating whether I should just smooth call to see a safe card on the turn, or if I should just raise right here and now, the hijack calls out of turn. This means that if I only just call, I'll definitely be taking this hand multi-way. With all the potential bad turn cards I might see, I decide to raise the action up to 150 instead. Surprisingly, the hijack still ends up making the call. So that settles it. He definitely has a draw of some sort. The big blind quickly folds, but the under the gun player starts to tank. My raise is not all that big. If he has a big ace here, you would think he would call pretty quickly. He ends up tanking over 30 seconds in fact. I'm not sure what I would do if he re-raises, since this particular opponent is more action than most, but eventually he just ends up calling. The turn brings in a queen of diamonds, putting 2 diamonds on board to go along with the 2 hearts. If the under the gun player has ace queen here, he just caught up to take the lead, but I think ace queen would have called much faster on the flop. Plus we did just pick up a backdoor diamond draw to go along with our bottom 2 pairs, so we have a ton of outs even against such a hand as ace queen. We could hit a diamond, a 4, or a 6, all of which would be completely clean outs, since the ace and queen of diamonds are already accounted for. So when under the gun checks, with bottom 2 pairs, our hand is too vulnerable to check this back, so I fire out a modest bet of 300 into the pot of 530. Nothing crazy, I want to charge the various draws and one pair combinations without going overboard, although it's very unlikely for any one pair combination to continue at this point. Both opponents end up making the fold, but this is still the biggest pot we've won so far this session. Fair warning, this hand is about to feature a really lengthy, in-depth analysis, so if that's not the sort of thing you're into, go ahead and use the timestamp on the bottom to skip past this hand. Just when I thought I was finally starting to pick up some steam, I don't win another noteworthy hand for the next hour and a half. We slink all the way back into the negative 1k territory. We're currently 3 hours into the session, and the only two hands I've won of note was that tiny pot with pocket kings and the modest win with the two pairs. As you guys may or may not know, I keep the vast majority of my sessions to around 3 to 4 hours. This is the time frame where I'm most focused and guaranteed to be playing my A game. If I push myself to 6 hours, we start heading into B game territory, and anything after that just inches us closer to Tiltsville and Fatigue Land. So right now I'm headed towards the end of my usual playtime, and I haven't hardly played any noteworthy hands or booked any solid wins for the vlog. In fact, I've been stuck in the red since almost as soon as I sat down. Sometimes people watch these vlogs and they think it's all action from one hand to the next, and they often ask like, "Hey Aero, can you teach me how to be lucky like you?" Or, "How do you hit so many sets? I haven't hit a set in weeks." It's like, guys, dost thou even hoist? If you want to practice hitting sets like me, just spend more time at the gym. No, but seriously, you guys are only seeing bits and pieces of the puzzle. You're not seeing how many hands I fold in between the action-packed hands, or how many flops I completely miss and don't bother showcasing. Admittedly, I am starting to make more of the every hand showcase type of vlogs, where you do get to see all of the boring stuff, if that's the kind of thing that tickles your nipples. Anyways, so here I am thinking about packing up shop soon, but I figure I should show you guys what a boring losing session looks like. So here, after the middle position limps, the low jack raises to 20. He's a conservative middle-aged guy, probably in his 50s. The hijack calls, and I call on the button with ace jack offsuit. Now, you may have noticed that a lot of vloggers like to 3-bet with hands like the one I'm currently holding. I'm not here to create action though. I'm not here to play GTO. I have a very mediocre and often dominated hand, so I'm perfectly happy to just flat call on the button against a 4x raise from a conservative player. You have to keep in mind that a lot of content creators are here to do just that, create content. They want views and clicks. They're not necessarily poker crushers. I have one of the absolute highest win rates in all of Las Vegas for the low stakes, and I'm here to show you how to replicate my success. And a hand like ace-jack offsuit against a conservative player's opening range when not using a 3x sizing is definitely not a hand I want to 3-bet with. So anyways, the small blind ends up folding, but the big blind and middle position both join the party. We go 5-handed in position to flop of 9, 6, ace, rainbow. We flop top pair with an above average kicker, but we're pretty dominated against ace queen or ace king. The action checks around to the original raiser, who throws out a tiny quarter pot size bet of 25. The hijack folds. Now you may be thinking this is a super tiny bet. He can't be all that strong. But keep in mind this board is also pretty darn dry. The only logical draws here are gut shots, or a hand very specifically holding 7-8 for the open-ended draw. There's no reason why our opponent can't have a bigger kicker than ours with a hand like ace-queen or ace-king, or even a set with a hand like pocket nines. On this sort of disconnected flop, since I do have position, I only just smooth call. The big blind folds, but the middle position tags along as well. The turn brings in an absolutely gorgeous jack of spades, keeping the board deliciously rainbow. We improve the top two pairs, only losing very specifically to flop set. Sadly, the action checks around to us this time. Anyone holding an ace with a smaller kicker is now drawing completely dead against our hand, and anyone holding an ace with a bigger kicker is only drawing to 3 outs. We're only realistically concerned about sets and the threat of someone holding 7-8 or 8-10. On this sort of dry board, I don't think it's necessary to bet too big, so I throw out an insulting bet of 75 into the pot of 175. Now, you may be wondering why my bet is priced so low. This is for a few different reasons. Let's say the middle position only has a 9 or a 6. He's literally only drawing to 2 outs. He can no longer make 2 pairs and hope to beat our hand. If the low jack original raiser raised with a hand like ace-10 suited, he's literally drawing dead. And if his raising range is actually ahead of ours, then he only has 3 outs. I love giving a really good price to people who are drawing very close to dead. A bet of this size also serves the dual purpose of defining our opponent's range. If the original raiser really did flop a set of 9s, he's going to be heavily induced to check raise at this point, since I'm using such a small bet sizing. If he only just calls, we will know with near certainty that we have the best hand right now. Compare that to, for instance, if we bet full pot. Now a set doesn't have to check raise versus such a large bet. He can continue to trap us and potentially perform a check raise on the river to put us all in, assuming the river is an insignificant card. When you play a deep stack game, every single bet you make needs to fulfill a very specific purpose, whether it's to target certain hands, to gain information, or to extract max value. I'm mostly sure, but not completely sure, that I have the best hand right now. So my bet is designed to extract max value from hands that are utterly crushed, as well as to ascertain if I do in fact have the best hand. If you play in a 100 big blind structure, you don't need to play this defensive. You can skip the information gathering stage and just almost always go for max value. So anyways, the middle position ends up folding, but the low jack makes the call, which is ideal because the middle position limper is the player most likely to be holding 7-8 or 8-10 for the open-ended draw here. If he had made this call, I would put him on a very different range than the low jack. You need to be keenly aware of the different opponents in the hand at all times and why they might have different hand ranges. Someone who limps will have a very different hand range than a conservative player who raises using a 4x sizing. Okay, so the river comes and it's not a queen or a king, but it is a 5, completing what would have been the open-ended straight. The low jack checks again. Okay, so what do we know about the low jack? We know that he's a conservative player, so he's very unlikely to open with a hand like 7-8 suited. We also know that conservative players, otherwise known as OMCs, don't like to put very much money into the pot. That 5 is just going to be another card that'll give him cause for concern, because now he'll be afraid that we might have 7-8. Okay, so let's say we arrived at this river and we had a different sort of hand here that we want to turn into a bluff. A hand like 5-7 of diamonds or 5-7 of clubs, for instance. Don't get your hopes up just because you've now made bottom pair with such a hand. I can assure you, your hand has no showdown value here, the way this hand is played. I would have made the same small bet on the turn with that sort of hand, setting up for a massive river bluff. Now since there's another hand combination that our opponent needs to worry about, if we wanted to bluff at this pot, we would throw out a massive overbet. It's about $400 or so. This will almost certainly get a fold from a conservative player with only one pair, even if it's as strong as ace-king. Keep in mind this tactic may not work in the 1-3 stakes where players are less likely to fold. However, since we are currently not trying to get our opponent to fold, and since he has shown a very weak stance in this hand so far, we want to use a value bet sizing, which will guarantee a call. So I throw out an irresistible bet of 125 into the pot of 325. Keep in mind that all of my bet sizing is dependent upon my opponent aggression. Had my opponent bet larger on the flop, or led again on the turn, this hand would have turned out completely different. Right now I am targeting a hand from an opponent that has not shown very much strength. I'm most likely up against a hand like ace-10 suited. Against such a hand, I can't bet very much here and expect to be called. I understand this may all seem very complicated, but you'll get the hang of it once you learn how to narrow your opponent's hand range down with more precision. So even against my very tiny river bet, my opponent still tanks for almost 30 seconds before eventually putting in the call. We table our hand, and of course it's good, but listen to the original audio to hear what my opponent thought I had in the hand.
Right? Yeah, that's what I thought you had too.
So you see, he was definitely afraid of the river straight as well as ace-jack, meaning if I were holding a different sort of hand, I could have easily turned it into a bluff with a large river bet. The very next hand, under the gun limps. I raised to 15 in the cutoff with 6-7 of diamonds. putting in a tiny pot sweetener since I have suited connectors in good position. The button folds, but the small blind suddenly puts out a respectable 3-bet to 65, with a stack of about 1150. The big blind and under the gun players fold. Damn, I'm being punished for making that tiny raise. I've been stuck all night, and I only just won a couple $100 after not getting any playable hands for over an hour and a half. Maybe playing so long without getting any playable hands is starting to put me on tilt because I make the call. I think it's about time we call an ambulance.
Call an ambulance! Call an ambulance! But not for me!
I'm just kidding. The flop comes 7-7 queen, rainbow. We flop trip 7s in a 3-bet pot on a rainbow board. It gets even better when the small blind comes out firing with a massive overbet of 200 into the pot of 140. And I'm sitting here licking my chops. My call pre-flop was definitely not a tilt call. I just really want to use that meme. I was getting over 20-1 for my money pre-flop to make the call. I literally have a vlog titled 6-7 of diamonds or pocket aces. Which would you choose? Kinda funny that I find myself in that exact same situation once again. So my opponent just bet $200 into a super dry flop with no draws of any kind. He's practically screaming that he has an overpair. Even if I had ace-queen suited, I would fold here. So basically, with such a bet sizing, he's going to get me to fold all hands that he has beat, and only call or raise with hands that have him beat. Recreational players very often make this mistake. On an extremely polarizing board like this, he should choose an extremely small bet sizing to keep in all of my dominated hands. On a flop like this, one of us only has 2 outs, and thankfully, it's not me. Okay, so we know our opponent has an overpair. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Should we only just flat call, knowing he only has 2 outs? No, absolutely not. A recreational player's mentality is very often, I don't have anything to be afraid of, so I can just slow play with this hand. Whereas a professional will often think, how do I get more money into this pot? This is especially true in a deep stack game. If I choose to slow play here, another queen on the turn will kill all the action. And if our opponent has pocket kings, then an ace on the turn will also potentially kill all the action as well. We need to get all the money in while our opponent is missing the fold button from his screen. There is nearly a 0% chance an opponent will fold an overpair to a raise on this sort of flop. So I put in an insulting min raise to 400. My opponent instantly shoves all in, and of course we make the snap call. He tables 2 red aces, and I show him that we have him crushed with our trip 7s, because I don't want to slow roll him. The turn brings in a 5 of hearts, and the river is clean with a 3 of diamonds. We finally scoop a massive pot to not only work our way out of the weeds, but come into the green for the first time this session for nearly $500. I have a very different playstyle than many coaches. I don't stress over trying to win every single pot, 3-betting light to disguise my 3-bet range, or c-betting 100% of the time to supposedly make things more difficult for my opponents to predict. I have different techniques to deal with those sorts of issues. Most sessions, it only takes one good hand to make my entire night. As long as you keep your mental fortitude strong, you can endure the bad beats and the long hours of being card dead until you make it to that one big hand that you need. You want to avoid going tilt at all costs, and this is the primary reason why I keep my sessions to 3 to 4 hours most of the time, and also try to nap before every time I head out to the casino. Hey guys, as you can see, I'm wearing my D&D Christmas sweater. There are only a couple days left until Christmas. That means you can still get in on my $5,000 end of the year cash drawing. There's still a little bit of time for some last minute contestants. This month, I'm still also giving away my usual $500 monthly cash drawing as well. So that means that this month, I'm going to be giving away $5,500. Okay, so how do you guys qualify for these cash drawings? Well, you got to play in one of the 2 clubs that Vixen X Poker and I endorse. We're talking about the Cheddar Club and the Easy Cheese Club. You can get the details in the description below. Speaking of the Cheddar Club, one of our latest members has been absolutely destroying the tournament scene. He's won like 3 tournaments or something like that in the last 3 weeks, and he's already up over $8,000, so I wanted to give him a huge shout out. Since it is the holidays, there's probably not going to be a video next week. I'm leaving town and I'm probably not going to get back until after New Year's. But in the meantime, enjoy the rest of the video. 10 minutes later, the cutoff opens to 15. I call in the small blind with pocket fives and the big blind calls as well. We go three-handed, out of position, to flop of 9, 9, 7, rainbow. It's possible we could have the best hand right now versus random overcards, and it would also really suck if the action checked around, only for the turn to bring out another 7, counterfeiting our hand to 5 freaking high. So I lead with a very tiny bet of 15. Interestingly enough, both opponents make the call. We don't need to really worry about anything they're holding though, when the turn brings in an absolutely gorgeous 5 of hearts, improving our underpair to a beautiful full house. Now, instead of trying to bet my opponents out, I'm really hoping someone is holding a hand like 6-8 for a turn straight, or something similar. Yes, I do have a full house here, but you guys should know by now that I almost never advocate slow playing. I want to charge anyone on a straight draw with a hand like 8-10 for instance, anyone holding a 7, or something similar. So I lead with a second bet, but for 40 this time, into the $90 pot. The big blind ends up folding, but the cutoff does put in another call. The river brings in a jack of diamonds, which is quite beautiful in our eyes. Now, not only does 6-8 make a straight, but 8-10 does as well. This time, I don't screw around. Both draws should have gotten there. I eyeball my opponent's stack and notice he has just over $300. So I fire out a nearly pot-sized bet of 150 into the pot of 170. And I'm delighted when he shoves all in for the remainder of his stack. Hey man, if you have pocket 7s or 9-7 suited, then take my money. I snap call. My opponent tables King 9 offsuit for slow play trips, and I scoop the rest of his chips. And this is exactly why I keep encouraging you guys to never slow play. He got a bet and a call on the flop, and he still only just smooth called. That's the point where he should have raised to like 50 or so. I would have gotten out of the way, and he wouldn't have gotten stacked. It's not that I win time and time again because I'm luckier than anyone else. That just doesn't make any logical or rational sense. You can't look at this hand and think, I must be super lucky to hit a magical 2-outer on the turn. You need to look at this hand and analyze that my opponent played the hand completely wrong, allowing me to win. If you learn to minimize your mistakes, you too will start to book a much higher win rate. For the last hand of the night, I open to 25 in the middle position with King Queen of clubs. The hijack and button both call. The flop comes 3, King 9, rainbow with 1 club. We flop top pair with a great kicker, as well as a couple of different backdoor draws. This is a pretty disconnected flop. Either our opponents have a dominated king here, or pretty much nothing at all. I don't want to give a cheap price for any gut shot draws. Plus I don't like the fact that I'm out of position against my opponents, so I start with a larger than normal c-bet of 50 into the $80 pot. The hijack folds, but the button makes the call with a stack of about 200. The turn brings in a beautiful 5 of clubs, improving our hand to include the backdoor flush draw to go along with our top pair and great kicker. Bro has less than a pot-sized bet remaining, so no need to do anything weird here. I go all in for the remainder of his chips, and my opponent puts in the call. We table our hand, and the 4 of hearts on the river doesn't help our opponent, so we win another nice little pot to end the night. At this point, the table is starting to get really short-handed, and I'm also approaching my 4-hour time limit, so I rack up my chips and head towards the cage. In for 2,700, since I was stuck for $1,200 at my low point and had to rebuy, and out for $36.90 for a delectable profit of $1,260 after 3 hours and 48 minutes of playtime. All of my great hands happened in the last 45 minutes of my session, after enduring 3 grueling hours of loss after loss. In that short time frame, I was able to make over a 2K turnaround. So do I win all the time? Of course not. Nobody does. But I do try to minimize my mistakes, and I do have a really high win ratio. If you look at my recent stats, you'll notice I did lose over 500 bucks right there. That was at Resorts World during an Absolute Nuts live stream, which is actually an incredibly small loss for how big their games play. And here are my stats for the last 3 months. You'll notice I have an incredibly high hourly rate, and it was actually even much higher back in September, which isn't visible on the screen here. Sadly though, I'm gonna have to bow out of my 100k challenge. I'm nowhere close this year. My currently hourly for the year is just over 100 bucks. So to make 100k in a calendar year at my hourly rate, I would need to work about 1,000 hours over the course of 52 weeks. That breaks down to less than 20 hours a week. Unfortunately, I'm working nowhere near that right now. I'm gonna be honest, I'm a lazy bastard. I don't want to work full-time or anywhere even close to full-time. With the hours I'm putting into trying to get out a weekly vlog, if I try to put in 20 hours a week playing poker, that'll definitely put me into full-time hours, and that's not what I want to do. I'd rather spend most of my time with my family and our pets. But hey, if you want to be a lazy bum like me, meanwhile still bringing in a great monthly income, then watch more of my videos. If you guys like what you saw today, remember to smash that like button. Hype this video if you get the option to. Subscribe to the channel if you want to learn more tips and tricks on how to crush low stakes, no limit hold'em. Follow me on Instagram to find out about my monthly $500 cash raffles and the end of the year $5,000 cash raffle. Check out my Patreon if you want to see more of the coaching series as well as to get early access to my vlogs. And as always, I hope to see you in the next video.